want to start off with a disclaimer. I'm going to be talking about some things that may be a bit sensitive for people if you're not accustomed to hearing the truth very directly. But I want you to know that I'm speaking from a place of truth and love. And in talking about truth and love, I must address this issue of justice or injustice in the context of most of the country when it comes to bicycling for blacks and Latinos. My thoughts are my own. They're not Rutgers University. They are strictly mine. So if you're going to attribute them to anyone, attribute them to me. So I'm here today to talk about barriers to bridges, how you center equity within planning and transportation decision making. But before I start, I want to say right away that James Brown and I are not related. I could only wish that I could dance like James Brown or sing like James Brown, but I cannot. I get asked this question, so I want to get that out of the way. Next up, I want to let you know that you call me Charlie Brown. But if you're going to call me Charlie Brown, make sure you have this image in mind and not the other Charlie Brown. So I took it up on myself to go and recreate Charlie Brown as I see him. And you can see that that's a very handsome guy there. He's well dressed, so this is my version of Charlie Brown. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get serious. Today I'm not Charlie Brown. Today I'm Franklin. And by show of hands, how many of you are familiar with a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving? Oh, all right. So you may or may not know the story of Franklin. But today I'm Franklin. And you'll understand that as the presentation goes on. So Franklin was invited to Thanksgiving. And prior to coming there, Franklin had a question. He said, what should I wear? He never got a response. And also when he got there, Snoopy put Franklin in this chair. And if you remember the story, this chair was an evil chair. But Franklin was expected to sit in that evil chair, remain calm, and participate in this Thanksgiving meal. This happened around, Franklin was introduced to a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving in the 1960s, right after Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. Someone wanted to see, or they didn't see enough diversity in the cartoon, so Franklin was created as a result of that. But when you're looking at this picture, I want you to pay more than just attention to Franklin. I want you to look at the power dynamics. I want you to look at the fact that no one is sitting next to Franklin. I want you to look at who's talking. There are a lot of things I want you to look at. But for now, let's move forward. I've established the fact that I'm not Charlie Brown today, even though you may call me that when this presentation is over. Right now, I'm Franklin. And what I want to do is, I want to give Franklin an opportunity to say what he could have said during that Thanksgiving meal if he had been given the opportunity to speak. And I'm going to speak within the context of creating an active transportation system for everyone through the lens of equity and environmental justice. So Franklin is here today to remove your blindfold. Some of you may think you don't have a blindfold, but you must have a blindfold if Franklin isn't at your Thanksgiving table, if Franklin isn't in your social network, if Franklin isn't a person that you can call on to ask, just a random question or something, you must have a blindfold because you cannot understand the challenges of Franklin if you don't know one. Also, many of you have a goal to create this active transportation network, but if you're going to do that, if you want to change what's visible, you have to first change what's invisible. And that's the role of Franklin today. So what are barriers to minority bicycle access and usage? Well, there are several themes around training, harassment, awareness, access, power, support or lack of support, storage, crime, fear, engagement, as well as cost. Each of these barriers today will be addressed by Franklin, and I understand in addressing these barriers. Any planners in the room? Any researchers in the room? Public health people, raise your hand. Attorneys? Good, no attorneys, we can really move forward now. I was hoping there was no attorney. So, I understand that without data, I'm just another person with an opinion. And that's usually the response I give people when I ask a question and they say, well, X equals this. What proof do you have that that is true? So I'm not coming here today to share an opinion. I'm coming here to share facts. And that facts is grounded in research that I've done. Some of the best research I feel that have been done looking at barriers to minority bicycle access and usage across the country. And so the research was, here in New Jersey, we were looking at what are the barriers to and how to identify the solutions to bicycle access and usage among blacks and Hispanics in New Jersey. And we started with 3 questions. Why do blacks and Hispanics choose not to bicycle? What prevents them from choosing to bicycle more? And what can be done to encourage all of them to bicycle more often? The methodology included a very comprehensive literature review. And what we determined really quickly is that not enough people were talking about this issue throughout the country. Secondly, we held 2 focus groups, one with Hispanics. I want to point out that the one with Hispanics was held in Spanish, Spanish only speaking. We held one with blacks, and of course that one was held in English. Each person received $50 cash to attend, as well as drinks and something to eat. If they needed childcare, we would have provided that as well, but no one stated they needed. In terms of the surveys that were conducted, we went to 34 different towns throughout New Jersey over the course of a year. And we handed out 2 surveys in doing this. The first survey was for people who identified as bicyclists. So I would come up to you on the street and I would say, have you bicycled within 12 months of today? Your answer would be what?
Yes.
Yes, you were considered a bicyclist, you were given a bicyclist survey. I come up to you and I want you to say no. I would say, have you bicycled within 12 months of today? You would say what? No. No, you were considered or classified as a non-bicyclist. The difference between the surveys is we ask you what your motivations are for bicycling, and we ask you really quickly, why don't you bicycle? Beyond that, all the themes that I outlined in the beginning were the things that we were getting at: power, lack of support, infrastructure, etc. Those are the things that were identical in both surveys. And here's what we found. We asked about cost and maintenance. Do you think a bicycle is expensive to purchase and maintain? And nearly 25% of the people thought so, with more women thinking so than men, and those making less than the median household income for New Jersey, which is $72,000 a year, thought so as well. So 1 in 4 people felt that a bicycle was expensive to purchase and maintain. That is a barrier. We also asked about bike share. How many of you are familiar with bike share here in Fort Collins? Well, within New Jersey, we have, if you're not familiar with the context of New Jersey, to the north there's New York, the only city in the Northeast, as they like to say. To the south, there's Philadelphia. If you live within New Jersey, you are within an hour of either one of those cities, and a lot of people commute to either one of them. Well, we wanted to know how many of them were aware that this city bike existed in New York, the bicycle shown here, or the Indigo in Philadelphia. And you can see that based on the results of that study, nearly 60% of the people were not aware that the system even existed. Not being aware of bike share is a barrier. You have to figure out how to address or increase awareness around bicycle. But then we ask a follow-up question, because we often find that bike share is located in the central business district first and not in minority communities, with the premise being that they won't ride those bikes. Well, we asked them, and you can look at the bottom one. Let me go back to the bottom one here. We asked them, how many of you would use bike share if it was in your community? The overwhelming majority, 85% of them, stated that they would use bike share if it was in their community. The question is, why aren't there discussions about bike share being placed in minority communities? Why is the constant theme or narrative that they will not use this system if it's located in their community? Not having bike share access is a barrier to bicycling for blacks and Hispanics. We also asked a question that has not appeared in any other bike survey that I reviewed, and that question is about power, access to political power. By show of hands, how many feel that you have proper access to political power? Meaning you can call someone, they'll pick up the phone and maybe do something about your issue. Well, when we asked these people, most of them said that they do not. But I want you to look at this picture, and planners, I don't want you to say anything, everyone else. I want you to just shout out. What do you see wrong with this picture? What would you like to improve? Anyone, shout it out. That's it. Say it louder.
Everything.
People.
Bike lanes.
The guy next said no people. Bike lanes. What else?
Sidewalks.
Sidewalks. What else?
Trash.
Trash. What else?
Empty lot.
Empty lot. What else? Would you add trees? Would you add plants, right? Did you clean up the property? Yes? Here's what the people said that they would do. Notice the difference. They added a bike lane, and in that bike lane, they even added well, let me give you more context. This was primarily an African-American community who we asked this question. And it went from this to this. Even though they didn't believe that government would make these improvements, this is what they said they wanted. I give my man in the back extra credit. You pointed out something that no one else has pointed out when I'm giving this presentation. They added people. But not only did they add people, they made sure that they added people that look like them. So if you are a planner and you're doing this work and you're doing these before and after renderings, many times what you get is a rendering of all white people, even though the community is black or Hispanic Latino. Do you know the message that you're sending to people when you say, currently your community looks like this, but we're going to invest in your community and it's going to look like this, except for this guy. You're telling them that you're creating a condition by which they will not receive the benefits from. There's a quote that says, trees planted in low-income communities mature just in time for gentrification to take place. Trees planted in low-income communities mature just in time for gentrification to take place. So what you have here, you bring your bike lane, you bring your sidewalks improvements, but this guy doesn't receive the benefit from the investments that you've made. Now, considering that there's changing demographics, there are people moving from the suburbs back into the inner city. Will the people who are in the inner city now reap the benefits of those improvements, or will they be out in the suburb left to suffer and fight on their own? So planners, that's your challenge. Don't plan for today, plan for tomorrow with the thought in mind that changing demographics are going to have an effect on the people who are moving to the suburbs. So we did ask them a question about government support and investment. 64% do not feel that their government currently supports or invests in bicycling. We asked about safe bicycle storage. Only 1 out of the 4 people who identified as you as non-bicyclists had actual safe place to store their bicycle. How many of you would continuously buy a bicycle if you don't have a safe place to store it? Especially when you consider the fact that we found that many of them have been victims of bicycle theft, not once, not twice, but 3 times or more. If your car is stolen 1 time, most of you will lose it. But if your car is stolen 3 times, what would you do? Would you buy another car, or would you abandon cars altogether? Let's make it easier for you. If your bike is stolen 1 time, how do you respond? Someone scream. Let me hear it. Buy another one. You would buy another one. Stolen 2 times, what would you do? Buy another one. Buy another 3 times, what would you do? Yeah. Buy a cheaper one. 3 times, what would you do?
Take a pedicab.
Take a pedicab.
Buy a block, yeah.
What you've identified, sir, is that you are privileged.
I know.
You have options. The people here, they choose simply to never buy a bike again. Because it was already difficult for me to buy my first bike. It was stolen. I get a second one, whether it was borrowed, loan, or whatever, it's stolen. 3 times, you're not going to say, I'm going to take a pedicab. You may just walk more. You may take public transit, etc. But you can see here that males reported being victims more than twice as much as female. And then we get at this issue around safe routes to school, child safety, how generational fear is passed on to kids. We asked the question, do you feel that your children are safe in bicycling in your neighborhood? And nearly 60% of them do not feel their kids are safe to bicycle in their neighborhood. That becomes a barrier, a generational barrier. You're passing down fear that it's not safe for you to bike. So when are you ever taught to feel comfortable bicycling when you've heard your entire life that it's not safe to do so? And then there's this issue around professional bicycle training. There are millions of dollars that are given throughout this country to actually engage and teach these populations of bicycle. But when we asked the question how many of them had received professional training, 9 out of 10 had not. Where's the money being spent? Who's benefiting from the spending of the money? If these people are not being reached, who are they reaching? white people, as he said. We asked about perceived police harassment. We asked how many of you have been unfairly stopped by a police officer while riding. Nearly 15% stated that they had been stopped. Now, many people, when you look at the comparison between 60, 70, 80%, you think, well, 15% is not bad. But if I have you count out every 1 out of 10 of you raise your hand, to me, that's a problem. It's really a problem when you look at the fact that males reported being stopped nearly 7 times that of females. Many of these males are the primary breadwinners in their homes, but now they're afraid to bike because of perceived police harassment. And then we asked them about some of the one-on-one barriers, a predetermined list of barriers. What are your barriers? They said, well, I'm afraid, fear of traffic collision. And then number 2 was a fear of being robbed or assaulted. How many of you, by show of hands, while riding your bicycle, have a fear of being robbed or assaulted while bicycling? It's great that the women raised their hand because part 2 of the research was focused on your concerns and issues. But you're the only 2 that raised your hand. 30% of them, well, not 30%, but 30% of all respondents chose fear of robbery or assault while bicycling. So what that led to was me challenging engineers and planners to think about the duality of safety. Safety isn't just about you possibly being hit by a car. It's also about you being physically robbed or assaulted while bicycling. But many of you may not have to worry about that if crime isn't in your community. But that becomes a barrier for this population. So we asked them about the potential solutions, and they said they wanted a bicycle lane in their community between them and their destination. They also wanted off-street bicycle paths. And many of them wanted better weather, but there's nothing that we can do about that. Today we all want better weather, but there's nothing we can do about that. But they listed out some of the things they want, like being closer to a bus or a train, or having secure bicycle parking at their destination. And then when looking specifically at the different races and ethnicities, African Americans wanted secure bicycle parking at their destination. Why? They were more likely to be a victim of bicycle theft than others. Hispanics wanted, they said that they would bike more if they didn't have a car. Well, we can't do anything about that. But what we could do is put something there, add a bicycle lane between them and their destination, and mixed race, meaning multiracial, the same thing for them as well. Now I want to get to the issue at hand, which is creating an inclusive community. I want to go back to the theme of Charlie Brown. And I know right now many of you are looking at me like this, and that's okay. What you're talking about, Willis. I want you to think about, I want you to envision yourself as Franklin at this table, if you have the ability to do so. And I want you to tell me, what must Franklin be feeling or thinking while sitting at this table?
Alone.
He feels alone. What else?
Conspicuous.
Conspicuous. What else?
Fear.
Fear. Fear of what?
The unknown.
Fear of the unknown. What else?
He's uncomfortable
He's uncomfortable. Why is he uncomfortable?
because they put him in the awkward chair.
They put him in the evil chair.
Yeah.
Let's not have revisionist history. I know you, I can say it. Yes, what else? What else? You think he's feeling tokenized? He's the only one. Do me a favor. I want you to do me a favor now and look around this room. How many Franklins do you see? There are no Franklins.
One.
There is one. How do you think I feel in this room?
How do you feel?
How do I feel? I feel empowered. Because right now, I have the floor. The difference is that Franklin did not. He was told to sit there and be quiet. Things have changed since Franklin appeared in a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. The question is, how do you feel now that Franklin has the floor? How does it make you feel hearing how Franklin must have felt at this table?
Sad.
Sad. All right? So think about Franklin feeling the entire weight of an African American community on his shoulder. Everyone is asking him questions about, how do the black people feel? How do the Hispanic people feel? He has to have an answer for everyone. And the truth of the matter is, he only has an answer for him and his experience. He can't speak for an entire race, nor can any of us in this room. So that's another thing that Franklin is thinking about while sitting at that table. Back to that evil chair. Many of you would not have believed that there was an evil chair. So here's proof that chair fought with Snoopy. That evil chair fought with him, and he had Franklin sit in that chair. That chair is about more than just a chair. It's symbolic of the conditions that blacks and Latinos and African Americans have been placed in, and you've expected them to remain calm while sitting in those evil communities. Not all communities were created that way by them. Many of them were placed in that evil chair. Now on to the current issue at hand. There's a critical point in time. The city of Fort Collins is looking to adopt or pass a comprehensive plan, a master plan as well as a transit master plan. And you're looking at, based on the definition down here, at creating an inclusive community. I've learned through the community toolbox that an inclusive community is one that does everything to respect all citizens, give them full access to resources, promote equal treatment and opportunity. It works to eliminate all forms of discrimination. It values diversity, etc. They also state when is the best time to build an inclusive community? When there's been a decision or an incident that has caused harm to a particular group of people. Can you think about here in Fort Collins when there was harm caused to a particular group of people? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hispanic population.
Hispanic, what harm was caused to them?
They were
I'll help you out.
ostracized.
There was ostracized, great word. A lot more than that happened. Here's what has been happening. When you go to Google, you type in Fort Collins, you type in terms like racism, racist, Muslim, mosque, gay, lesbian. You start getting news clips like this. It is the perfect time for Fort Collins to start thinking about creating an inclusive community because harm is being done to people. A lot of harm is being done to people. There are good people in Fort Collins, but we really have to address the harm that's being done to specific groups of people. And if you're thinking about creating an inclusive community, the question is, can you create one without an inclusive process? If the process by which you undertake look anything like the demographics of this room today, you don't have the ability to create an inclusive community. You are missing many, many Franklins. Here's a fishbowl discussion we did in New York to better understand what an inclusive process looked like. What do you see here?
Diversity.
You see diversity of all kind, right? What else do you see? Isn't there a different power dynamic in this circle versus that table with Franklin on the other side? You have to be aware of all these things because these things are sending messages. So my question to you, the city of Fort Collins, in creating this inclusive community, who's missing from your definition of everyone? How many Franklins will you overlook or have you overlooked in creating this inclusive Fort Collins for everyone? And then the question is, can you really engage those cultures or languages you don't fully understand? How many of you speak Spanish? Not enough. How many of you speak black? My man. See me later. My man right there. So think about the cultural barriers. Many people say Hispanic and Latino, Black, African American, you lump them all into one box. They're not all the same. You have to understand the people that are engaging, they're not all the same. So my next question to you is, can you truly engage those who you fear? If you fear me for whatever reason, ignorance or whatever, can you actually engage and build with me? I don't think so. We got to work past our fear. We got to get past that fear. Can you go into this community in New Jersey and actually perform outreach and engagement to people when you're thinking about how much trash is on the ground, how many buildings may be boarded up, how much crime is present in that community? If you have that fear, can you truly build an inclusive community? And then I want to ask a very direct question, and many of the people that are going to be shown in this next slide are my friends, but this is a question that has to be asked. Do members of the firms that you hire look anything like the people you're trying to reach and serve? Who believes so by show of hands? No one. Why aren't you doing something about it? Because when I see the people who get the proposal or the grants to do this work, they look like this. Or they look like this. Now, these are two firms that I have a great deal of respect for, but each time I go to their websites and I see no people of color working in planning, knowing how many of us out there have degrees in planning, this is a problem for me. Yet these people, and I don't mean anything to them personally, are being hired to engage communities that they cannot identify with. Back to Charlie Brown. And right now you're looking at me like this. What can a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving then teach us about centering equity and moving from barriers to bridges? Anyone have the answer to that? I'll tell you. First of all, it tells us that urban planning, as shown in this Roots article, cannot happen without black people in the room. It tends to happen, but you can substitute black with Hispanic, Latino, Asian, etc. It cannot happen without Franklins in the room. And notice that they didn't say a black person in the room. It gave you the plural form: black people, Latino people, Hispanic people, Asian people. How many of you are willing to give up your seat? Because this is about power dynamics. If you invite me to that table, one of you may have to give up your seat. How comfortable are you with doing that? But that's what it takes to create an inclusive process, if you're willing to do it. Next, here are some strategies for you from the NIH. Number one, be clear about the purposes or goals of the engagement effort and the populations you want to engage. Be very clear about them. Number two, become knowledgeable about the community's culture. If you don't know me, you can't engage with me, I can't build with you, we have a barrier between us. So it's important that you become familiar with this community's culture, its economic conditions, its political power structures, etc. Number three, learn about my perceptions of you before you even come to me. You may think you are the person to engage with me, whereas my community may have disregard for you because of mistrust or things that we've heard about your organization, etc. So first ask me, how do I feel about your organization before you try to work with me? And then fourth, go to the community, establish relationships, build that trust, work with the formal and informal leadership. I want to point out that most times when people go to do community engagement in Black and Latino communities, they check a box when they've met with the males of that community. They check a box when they met with the males of that community. I can tell you, as someone who was raised in a single-parent household by a phenomenal woman, she was the one that had the power, not my father. But you would talk to my father and say, we met with the Black community. Why are you not engaging the women? Why are they voiceless? In this context, they are friendly. Also, remember and accept that collective self-determination is a responsibility and right of all people. Don't say you're going to empower someone and not allow them to make decisions for themselves. Empowerment is about being a tool for me to do what's best for my community. And then 6, partnering with the community is necessary to create change and help. This is about partnership building, coalition building, etc. This is not about you doing all the work for me. And then also, all aspects of community engagement must recognize and respect the diversity of the community. I showed you slides of the firms that you engage with. I showed you a picture of Franklin at the table. That is what you get typically across this nation. It has to change. And then community engagement can only be sustained by identifying and mobilizing those community strengths and assets. And also by developing their capacity and resources to make decisions on their own and take action. And then lastly, be prepared to release control of actions or interventions to the community and be flexible enough to meet its challenges and needs. What that means is that I showed you the picture of Franklin at the head of the table was a white character that was talking. This says that be prepared to let Franklin lead that Thanksgiving meal. Are you prepared to let that happen? And then number 10, community collaboration requires long-term commitment. Don't come in today because you have a grant and don't show up to the next time you have a grant. If you're truly about creating an inclusive process, we'll be forming relationships of which you'll come by often and we'll have an established relationship built. And then 11, check your privilege at the door. Check your privilege at the door. How many hip hop fans do we have here? By show of hands. Well, there's this great prophet, and I'll end with his quote. He said, "Sit down and be humble." Thank you. Any questions, sir?
I got a question. In Fort Collins, our minority population is relatively small. We talk about how far we have to go to be more representative. Just bringing a kind of a representative number based on our population to the table might not be enough. Do you recommend kind of a greater? There's been so many years of under or non-representation. Do you feel like as we start getting ourselves into a position to be more equitable,
Yes, sir.
do we need to over-represent? And I don't mean over-represent, I mean over-represent based on the percentage of the population that we're talking about here.
No, I think that the process, if it's an inclusive one, accurately reflects the demographics of the community. In Fort Collins, about 10% of the population is Hispanic Latino. 1% or less is Black. At least have that level of representation in your community meetings. At the full. A minimum, you should have that, right? Because if you start doing an inclusive process, let's say, for instance, tomorrow, the city of Fort Collins says that, we're creating the vision for the next 20 years for the city of Fort Collins. And we're not going to allow but 3 white people into each meeting. What do you think will happen?
Right, yeah. You'd have 3 people at each meeting.
Yeah, you'll have 3 people at each meeting. But also what you would have is that you would have a firestorm. People would say, I haven't been a part of the process. They have access to political power. They can get you to do multiple workshops or additional workshops to create an opportunity for their voice to be heard. But why don't you have that firestorm when 10% of the Hispanic Latino community is not a part of your process? Why is the box checked when only one Franklin is at the table? Right? Nothing happens because they lack access to political power to actually make sure their voices are heard. So at a minimum, if you can't get 10%, at least shoot for 8. Right? Yeah. Great question. Yes, sir.
Were you suggesting with your survey that blacks are more apt to be stopped, black males more apt to be stopped on bikes? Would that be in comparison to cars, or is there something about a black male on a bike that has a certain response that's different than seeing a black in a different way?
Yeah, so what I did not show is the comparison to the other racial or ethnic groups. Black males were more likely to be stopped than any of the other racial groups, including white, Asian, etc. So my question back to you, is there something about a black man on a bike?
That's what I'm asking you.
Well, yes.
Because they're so exceptional? Isn't that so?
No, it's not about exceptional in the fact that the police feel that they need to harass you more often than others, if you consider that to be exceptional.
Is it the bike? And is that black male wearing a car not likely to?
Oh, well, okay, great, got it. In terms of context, this was only asked about bicycling. Yeah, so it's a comparison between.
Do you have any sense though? Is it something?
Well, there are articles I showed you of Fort Collins biking while black. There are studies that have been done, driving while black, walking while black, drinking coffee while black, same outcome. The common denominator here is race. The common denominator here is race. And what you seem to find in the planning process, the proxy or the what's being used to get at race is not the variable of race, but the variable of income. So people will say, we're going to analyze this environment, or we're not going to talk about that race stuff. We're going to do income because why? Most blacks and Hispanics may be of lower income, so they check the box. But that's not true. The experience that I have as a black man, I think is independent of my income. It's simply because I'm a black man on a bicycle. It has nothing to do with what I make. But what we found in New York is that poor bicyclists, not poor, but bicyclists with money, black men, they tend to, in some cases, appear poor because they don't want their expensive bike stolen, or they don't want to be robbed and assaulted in their community. So psychologically, before they walk out of the door, they dress in their worst attire. A lady in Atlanta who's married to a black man said her husband does the opposite. He dresses more like a cyclist, so he's not harassed by police. And by cyclist, I'm talking spandex, expensive bike, etc. He has learned that dressing and looking more like a cyclist, a white man in spandex on an expensive bike, he won't be harassed by a police officer. So depending on the context, you either don't want to be robbed or assaulted because you live here, or you don't want to be harassed by police because you live here. You're constantly trying to balance all of these things before you even step out of the door. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the quote about street trees maturing, time for gentrification. It's really powerful. I mean, that's, and then you're also talking about public infrastructure improvements. And I know that in different communities, people probably have different opinions about this, but just in general, I would just be curious to hear what your opinion is on that balance between public infrastructure improvements, let's just say enhanced bike lanes or whatever it is, and pricing out gentrification, change of character of a certain part of a community.
Yeah, so we asked the question more directly about, not in this survey, but in focus groups. The one you saw of the fishbowl discussion, that was around raised place public space, Bike and Mile Black in New York. And we asked them the question directly about gentrification. There was a mixed response. Some people felt that bike lanes were white lanes, meaning that they led to gentrification. Some felt that it wasn't. Some felt that gentrification was just happening anyway, and it wasn't due to the bike lane. So it really depends on the black person you ask.
Yeah.
But if you only ask one Franklin, you may walk away thinking that they either lead to gentrification or they don't, which is why a more inclusive process is very important, so you can hear from the community.
So community specific kind of.
Yeah, it varies. I mean, you find that some people think it does. I find it pretty ironic that the moment you start investing in the black community, all of a sudden demographics change in that community.
So
Why don't the
do you
demographics-
do you have any solution for kind of balancing that?
The solution for gentrification would be ownership. If I own the land, it's less likely that I'm going to be pushed out, right? Also, through the planning process, creating more opportunities for people to have affordable housing, for there to be less opportunities for developers to come in, reap the benefit of the incentives. The city incentivizes developers to come in, and then the people who are living there are pushed out due to the investment because rents go up. So there are no protections to help the people fight off gentrification. So it is a balancing act, and it varies according to location. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit more about that ownership piece and who the necessary partners are to be with planning to make that happen?
Well, there are community development corporations through the Urban League, who I work with in Newark. We've created a community development corporation to sort of own land so that we could say in the community how it's going to be developed, who's going to be there long term, etc. You need to own land. There are also developers who are very sensitive to this idea of gentrification happening. So they're creating inclusionary and affordable housing to protect against it. But there are a number of stakeholders. I also have a toolkit that I can send you that talks about how to deal with issues around gentrification. I'll send you like a 5-page toolkit. Yes, sir.
What about, did any of your research suggest that blacks, Hispanics, others have different uses of bikes in mind when they favor bikes, like commuting versus recreation or something like that?
No, we didn't ask that question directly. But what we did find with both groups is that they wanted a bicycle lane between them and their destination, number one, both groups equally. Number two, they wanted an off-street path. So the in-street one speaks more to commuting. The off-street one speaks more to recreational. So that could be sort of used to answer that question, but we didn't ask that question directly. No, sir. You guys have a question? Yes.
Let's talk tools for actually doing this. We're kind of in an era, a little bit of fear, especially for our Hispanic community,
Yeah.
in terms of trust with public entities. I mean, I'm a city planner, but, you know, I have nothing to do with like deportation, but that, sometimes that's not completely aware. How do we engage these communities? The best way to formulate that trust. I noticed that you were doing $50 to come to these focus groups and offering incentives.
I believe in paying people for their time. I think they are the real experts. People pay planning, engineering firms tens of thousands of dollars to engage with these communities. They don't give the communities anything to be there. So I believe if they're going to be there, value their time, they are the true experts. If you ask a question and I have the answer to the question, you're not the expert, I am. Right? You're just simply there to facilitate a process, but you've been deemed an expert, you're not you, but you get it. And people are paying you thousands of dollars, and then you study me like a lab rat and I get nothing. And it costs more for me to be there because I'm sacrificing time with my kids. I'm sacrificing a lot because I may not have the family structure or things in place to be present as you would be. So that's why it's important we check our privilege at the door and understand why people are not attending these meetings. Also, if there's been historic distrust, why would I come to the very institution to engage with you when I don't trust you anyway? You need to come to me. And we need to have the meetings in my community under my terms. Franklin needs to be speaking, not the other gentleman. You get what I'm saying? And then you need to show me proof that now that you've heard me talk about these things, you're actually going to do something as a city planner. You're going to hold up to your values and your principles and your ethics. And you're going to say, hey, the community said they wanted this. I'm going to do the best job I can do to try to get this for that community. Because if you're constantly coming to me to survey me, to treat me like a lab rat, and then I don't see improvements in my community, which tend to happen historically, why should I ever trust and believe you? So you have to work to establish that relationship, and it's not an overnight thing. You have to be patient. Yeah. You have to understand why people may or may not trust you, which requires a lot of humility. Yeah. Any more questions? No tough questions?
Got more time in the room, yeah, there we go.
I'm just thinking about, you were talking about, you know, if you want your, let's say a public meeting, for example, right? If you want to engage everybody, right, and you were showing the pictures of people from the planning firm,
Yes, ma'am.
you know, mostly white. And so have you seen any examples or have any solutions as to, okay, all the planners might be white, and the firms, you know, that were hired, you know, are mostly white. Have you seen any examples like this, and you know, there's not necessarily that engagement that you're hoping for, and then bringing people in that represent everybody in the community?
I gotta make sure I understand your question.
Okay, so
If you change the color of the people during the engagement,
Yes.
do you see more
yes,
of an inclusive process?
yes.
Absolutely.
And how do you bring more people in? or
You
more
step
diverse
outside
people?
of the bubble you live in, or the bubble you work in. You go up, Chris is a black man. Hey Chris, how you doing? The same way you would with any other person on the street. You remove the fear you have.
I guess I mean like if you want to bring more people into the engagement process.
Professionals?
Yes, professionals.
Oh, you hire people like me.
And I'm just thinking, yeah.
I mean, that's a straight.
Plan
There are
is
many- there are-
underway and-
Yeah, so Chris has done a great job identifying people of color throughout the country who do this work and who do it very well. There are many of us out there. I just happen to be speaking tonight, but there are many planners of color, whether they be black or Latino. The problem is they don't have a connection with you currently.
Yeah.
So you have to be very intentional about trying to find minority firms that can do this work. The onus is on you to be more intentional about that. If you are serious about creating an inclusive process, you would say, Charles, I don't know how to connect with black people. Do you know any black people? I would not feel insulted by that. I would give you a list of 10 black firms tomorrow who could do the work at Fort Collins. I'm not trying to take it, since you're recording this, work from white firms. I'm just letting you know that there's a process by which it can happen. It happens the same way in white communities. You know someone that knows someone that does planning who looks like you. I know someone that does planning that looks like me, and I can recommend them to you. But until we connect, you won't know who I know, I won't know who you know. So it's very simple. You now know me, I can give you names. That's access to political power that is missing in those communities. You get it? So we have to bridge that gap. We exist. Yes.
Just to comment to that, as a Latina woman from the design background, there aren't as many architects and landscape architects that kind of work in that field. And that's a challenge of that professional field.
Correct.
And, you know, there aren't a ton of people like me, I would say, in my experience.
That's true. But there's more than one.
But there's more than
Any questions? You have a question? Yes, sir.
Me?
Yeah.
If this was the last one, maybe. I thought I've seen Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, and I don't remember this. Is this still being shown?
So I'll tell you what happened. Perfect question. And I didn't tell him to ask that question.
And this is great, by the way. I'm glad I'm seeing that.
Yeah, I didn't tell you, full disclosure, I didn't ask you to ask that question, right?
Huh?
Okay, so what happened was, when I came across this, I saw some progressive place was talking, and they pointed out, they asked the question, is Charlie Brown racist? This is when I came across this. I had never seen that either. And so, since then, they have added more people on this side. What that gets at though, and I'm gonna put some of you on the spot. Bear with me. Raise your hand if you identify as a liberal. Did you notice that they tried to do a good thing by adding Franklin to a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving? This guy really tried to do a good thing. He noticed that there were no black people at the table. So he added one at the table. The issue is that when you don't diversify your staff enough, even as a liberal, you don't even know that to put him on this table, this side of the table by himself, is an insult. So you may have good intentions as a liberal, as whatever, but until you deal with the issues at hand in the context by which Franklin exists, you too may be putting Franklin on the side of the table by himself. So you have to face the conditions by which Franklin exists in the same way as everyone else. Even though you have good intentions, if you don't diversify and get Franklin's voice, you may add him on the same side of that table. Place him in that evil chair and expect him to remain calm. But you'll check your box and say, you know what? I know black people. And you'll only be referring to one Franklin. It takes more than that. It takes being an ally. It takes standing up and saying, these people are, suffering for whatever reasons. It takes love, is what it truly takes. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The question, I realized I came in a little bit late, but so I think about like the planning processes where you might have a community with a comp plan, and then they created a bike ped master plan, and then they've got a planning process around a specific neighborhood or corridor. And the comp plan's 7 years old, and they haven't really been working on being more inclusive in their planning process. And then their active transportation plan might have been a little bit more visionary, but by the time they're holding the planning process around like a specific corridor, and they're really trying to more proactively engage and diversify the community engagement, the community shows up for that. They're not even sure they like this because they're kind of victims of planning processes that came before them.
Yes.
And so I've seen this huge disconnect by the time you're in the neighborhood and doing some of these planning processes that like these are victims of old biases and exclusionary practices. And how do you remedy that? I mean, how do you kind of reconcile like feeling disaffected at this point?
Mm-hmm. You have kids? One? Let's say you had two.
All right, let's say that.
Just for the sake of discussion. You've agreed to give your children an allowance, right? You have Matthew, who's 10. You have Susie, who is 8. And you say each week, I'm going to give you guys $50.
Sweet.
And he, well, you know, $50, just for the sake of discussion. Every time that Friday comes when you get paid or bi-weekly, you give Matthew $50. You give Susie nothing. That happens for, let's say, you happen to be a bad parent. That happens for 2 years. Susan comes to you and she says, I've noticed that for the past 2 years you've given Matthew $50 every single week and you've given me nothing. What would be your response?
That's a good question.
You would say, I owe you $50 per week over the course of 2 years. You would first remedy the wrong you've done to Susan. And then you would hope from that point forward that you would give them each $50 per week as you say you would. So if you want to change that process by which you go in there as court of planning, first acknowledge that you've done me wrong for so many years. But you have to become aware of that, because you won't see Franklin if no one is bringing to your attention that Franklin existed in Charlie Brown, right? Some people may not be challenging you to think about it. So until Susie challenged you to think about the fact that you haven't been giving her something for X number of years, you won't do anything about it. So the way you address it is first acknowledge that you have not given me anything over the course of 2 years. Now we're even. My only expectation going forward then is that you give me my $50 every week the way you say you will. And each week when you give me that $50, you're building trust. Oh, Mom is back. She's giving me $50 now. You're back. So I'll start trusting you more. Same in the black community. Don't show up and act like we haven't been mistreated for X number of years. Don't show up and act like you haven't done a planning process, and through that planning process, you've taken my recommendations, but when the projects were built, I did not see them in the built projects, right? Just acknowledge that people have been done wrong and you can move forward. Cool? Yes, sir.
That raises another question. I don't know if you're familiar, but have you thought about local, state, and federal, different, here you're talking to us locals.
Yeah.
I look sometimes at state and federal, and especially with the recent campaign and the president, announced that we're going to rebuild the inner city.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounded great to me. But, you know, with that sort of perspective in mind, you know, local versus state versus federal, obviously we want to all cooperate and move right in. But have you thought about it?
So let me understand. You say when you heard him say he's going to rebuild the inner city, that sounded great to you?
It did. I mean,
It did sound great to Franklin.
No?
No.
I thought rebuild versus go out and start building a bunch of new gigantic highways and bridges. I know.
Oh, I think that would be...
Crosswalks, put bike lane, put...
Yeah. Yeah. No, but I didn't get that. I didn't feel that way when I heard that. What I heard is, I'm going to be pushed out of the city.
Wow.
That's probably what he meant too.
I don't know. I'm just telling you how Franklin felt when I heard that, was that, oh, if I don't own something, he's making these improvements. Prices are going to go up. I'm going to be out of the city. It's not that I don't want the improvements, but is he going to do something to protect my people?
Well, that's a whole twist on the whole thing, but when I looked at your slide, think of your slide with what people said they want. And,
but do you understand why I had that reaction? It goes back to her question in the back, like, how do you change this, right?
I do, yeah.
When I've heard people when I've seen investments happen in some of those communities,
Right.
when that tree matured, the people were not there to reap the benefits. So when you say you're now going to plant those trees in those low-income communities, I think my people are not going to be there to reap the benefits from those improvements. You're pushing me out.
Wow.
So you hear one thing, I hear something else, because I have a history, or the people have a history, of distrust of local government, local, state, and federal.
Well, that's huge. That is a huge other dimension that if that was going to be done with improvements where they're needed, You're saying that it needs to include and come along with this whole other aspect that isn't just physical infrastructure.
Yeah, because infrastructure doesn't exist
Housing,
outside of a
ownership.
social or political context.
All right.
You're making those improvements of which people on the other side of town, how many by show of hands have heard of Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma? There lies the problem. There lies the problem. If you've only gone to planning school, for instance, and if you've gone to planning school, you've not heard, or any of you have not heard of Black Wall Street, that's the problem. Thriving black communities existed. There were systematic things done to destroy those communities. One being transportation. I'm going to put a highway down the middle of your thriving business district. The kids, the grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren of those people are still alive. Those stories have been passed on. Don't trust them. Don't trust them. Don't trust them. So when you hear that, some of them here on TV, we're going to invest in that community, you think, is this a trick? I'm just giving you one perspective. There are multiple ways to look at that when you know the history of what has happened. Research highways destroying black communities and see how many articles you find on that. Any other questions? Thank you all so much for being here to kind of listen to something that is probably not easy to listen to. The weather is nice outside and you still showed up. Even though there's one or two Franklins here, we are still glad to be here because you gave us an opportunity to talk about something that may or may not be visible to you. So thank you, and thank Chris for the opportunity. All right.